Today, John Jardin from Ukuvuma is continuing his series, Optimus XPages, an explosion of techniques and best practices, with today's broadcast called Optimus XPages Part 2, the Deep Dive. My name is Courtney. I'm the marketing manager at Team Studio. Howard Greenberg and Paul Delanebbia from TLCC are joining me today, and we're your hosts. I'll be taking a few moments right now to cover some housekeeping items. Then I'll pass the presentation to Howard so he can give an intro, and then we'll dive into today's topic with John. So the housekeeping items. The attendee list is private. All attendees are muted during this session, so you can participate by typing your questions for John inside the question section on your GoToWebinar window. We're doing Q&A at the end of the session, but you're welcome to ask your question at any point in the question section. Howard and Paul will put a voice to it once John is finished presenting. This session is being recorded, and the links for the recording and the slides will be sent to you in a follow-up email in a few days. Team Studio provides notes application development and management solutions. We stand for efficiency, saving time, reducing errors, and helping you achieve your plans for the future. We celebrated 20 years in business at IBM Connect in Orlando earlier this year. Most of you have seen these product icons before, probably in your toolbar. These are the product icons for Notes Tools, our suite of tools for Notes developers and admins. They help with tasks such as source code control, performance, and troubleshooting. Take a look around our website to see what's new. Now I'd like to introduce IBM champion Howard Greenberg from TLCC. Howard's going to give an intro, then we'll get started with today's presentation. Over to you, Howard.
Oh, thank you, Courtney. Let me just switch the screens over here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for attending our webinar today. I know there's also another session going on today with Icon US, so appreciate you guys taking the time to come over and listen. So my name, as Courtney said, is Howard Greenberg, and along with my partner, Paul Delanebbia. Paul, why don't you say hello?
Good day, everyone, and thanks for joining.
So we're going to be your co-host today, and we're from TLCC. We've been doing Notes and Domino courses since 1997. Many of you probably know us. We have self-paced distance learning courses on XPages and Notes and Domino development and admin. We have 7 XPages courses from beginner to advanced, including 2 really good Java courses if you're looking to get into Java. And most folks who have been doing XPages for a while will probably suggest you learn Java if you haven't started already. I know we've talked about that in our last couple webinars. And our most popular course, if you haven't done anything with XPages yet, is an Introduction to XPages Development course, and that's totally free. So if you're wondering what this is all about, go to our website and sign up for that. And right now we're having a sale on our courses, and I'm just highlighting one example here, our Java for XPages. You can get both courses for $999, or normally it's $1,400. So that's going on through the end of the month, so check that out if you want to save some money. And also, Paul and I have been spending a lot of our time in the last year or two working on with our clients on their development needs. We kind of specialize in doing Bootstrap-enabled websites as well as Java, and using Java to connect to back-end data stores, like DB2 and things like that. So if you're looking to modernize your Domino web applications or convert your Notes apps to mobile and the web, let Paul or I know, and we'd love to talk to you about that. One of the advantages Paul and I have as instructors for so many years is that not only can we do the development work, but we also have the skills in transferring some of that knowledge back to your team and yourselves, so that you can then start to take over and do some of the development work yourself. Coming up in June, we got a first-time presenter for us for the Team Studio TLCC series, Johnny Oldenburger. Johnny's been doing some sessions at some of the user groups in Europe. and he has a great blog series on using Bootstrap with XPages. So he's going to kind of pull together some of the things he's been doing on his blog with Bootstrap and XPages and present that in June. So that's going to be a great webinar. Don't miss it. The link is there, as well as that link will take you to all our previous webinars going back a couple of years, which is a great resource as well. All the webinars are up on YouTube, and the slides are there, as well as some of the webinars have demo databases. So as Courtney mentioned, you can ask questions at the end. There's a picture on the screen. You use the little questions panel, if you want to call it that. If you're not seeing this, click on the little orange arrow and it'll expand this interface. So then you'll see the questions pane. So that's what you can ask your questions there, but then we're going to answer your questions at the end of the webinar verbally. So we won't be answering your questions in the chat. We're going to just kind of save them up for the end, and then we'll all discuss them together. Okay, so now we're on to John Jardin. John is an excellent presenter. You're going to enjoy his session. Now, he did a session for us back in March, and he presented a lot of high-level concepts that were really cool, but a lot of you sent us emails and said, we want more. We want to dive into the details. So today we're calling it the deep dive. So it's Optimus XPages. I got the wrong title on this slide, but it's Optimus XPages, the deep dive. So we're going to get into code and how you do things with John today. So John, let's going to make you the presenter. And are you out there, John?
Hi, sorry, Howard, can you see my screen?
I see your screen, and I hear you, yeah.
All right, that's great. We can then start off.
Take it away, John.
Thanks very much. So welcome, everyone, and I just want to say thanks once again to TLCC and to Team Studio for allowing me to present again in this webinar. It's really an honor, and it's great that these kind of video materials are available to the public. I'm sure a lot of people out there really appreciate it. So yeah, welcome to Optimus XPages Part 2, the deep dive. Like Howard said, in March we did the first Optimus XPages, and that really focused on a lot of high-level concepts on building sort of great XPages applications, and it really focused around a couple of core concepts, but it seemed to leave people wanting a little bit more. And what we decided to do was say, fine, let's introduce this deep dive and really show people what's going on under the hood when it comes to single-page app development and using some of the concepts that I explained in the initial session. So I need to say this off the bat. This is a pretty fast-paced session, and while I'm coding, I'm definitely going to be explaining what I'm doing along the way. I'll ask you all just to kind of be patient with me. I'll pace myself as best as possible, and I'm sure if I do land up moving a touch fast when it comes to screen transitions, that I'll be informed accordingly. So yeah, my name is John Jardin. I am the CTO of Ukuvuma Solutions, which is a software consulting company based in South Africa. I've got quite a number of years developing and consulting, and some of my core focuses include IBM Domino and XPages, web tech, mobile dev, and obviously a few other things. I'm also an IBM champion since 2013, and very honored to remain so to this day. All right, so I think the most exciting part of this presentation is the agenda. All right, there's not a lot of slides. I'm going to quickly go to one slide and recap some of the concepts that came out of the first webinar, just in case some of you that are watching don't have a concept of where we're going, and then from there I'm going to dive straight into building some great code. All right, so if we start off with the recap, some of the items, or should I say most of the items that I focused on in my initial webinar was just us as XPages developers building cloud-ready design strategies. Now, it's very important for us as ex-Domino developers, because we were used to designing and storing the data in the same NSF data store. And unfortunately, when it comes to cloud-based strategy, that cannot be the case. You need to separate your data from your actual design. So that was one of the items that I really focused on. Another one was mobile strategy. You have to, we've got the tools as XPages developers to already design applications that are already responsive. So there shouldn't really be an excuse not to use that, obviously, unless you are not allowed to use, for example, the XPages extension library. But let's hope in the very near future that all of this goes away with the next release of Notes and Domino, which I believe will include all of this great stuff. And then another item was single page app design. Inspired by mobile applications, it's the ability to not have to do full refreshes on your page and not navigate to different URLs when designing, let's say, a portal that consists of a number of applications. The single page application approach is one that we really favor here at Ukavuma, and it really just provides some powerful capabilities at the end of the day. Obviously, the XPages extension library and the OpenNTF Domino API, we use these as a standard with no questions asked, and I'll be showing off these two modules during the demo today. And then finally, an MVC strategy. When it comes to XPages development, model view controllers are very sort of loosely implemented. A lot of it is already built in, but what I do enjoy is that XPages gives you the flexibility to customize and define what you regard as an MVC strategy, and you'll be seeing most of that in today's demonstration as well. All right. So with that being said, it's crunch time. Let's go into the code. Okay. So I'm going to start off quickly and demo an XPages application that I have running here on Firefox. Now, offhand, this app doesn't look like much, but it gives us a great example of what a single-page app can do, and the least exciting an XPage should look if you are using the XPages extension library and obviously the OpenNTF Domino API. So if I just quickly do a demo here, I want to create a new leave request, and it gives me a basic form that has validation. I can go and capture some data inside here, and I can go and save that. That will be added to the list. I can even open up and modify whatever I want. So it's basic CRUD operations around leave, and I can click on tasks, which navigates to the task side of this single page app. And again, I've just got some CRUD operations where I can fill in some information, provide dates, save it, and even edit or do whatever I need to do. So there's just a couple of important points before I move on to the code. Number one, you'll notice that not once did the page fully refresh. If the screen transitions are a little bit slow, you'll need to just take my word for it. But on top of a year, we never moved away from home.xsp. It remains intact. Yet, the design and the architecture behind this application that I'm demoing allows us to easily implement a number of applications that form a single page app and manage the memory as well as the components required, as well as the HTML that gets written to the screen, so that we can keep this application optimized as well as performing at a great speed. And obviously we are using a Bootstrap environment, so if I do this, you'll see that it does respond accordingly. All right, so while this doesn't look like a great XPages application, this forms a great boilerplate for moving forward designing single page apps. All right, so let's get straight into the code. What we want to do first is we want to go and quickly create the layout of this design so that we have the title on top and we apply the necessary one or two controls that will allow us to get started with this application. So in the designer, you'll see that I have two NSFs in my designer. The first one is the portal and the second one is the portal data. So like I explained before, we do not store the data in the same NSF. We store it separately. That way, if we want to deploy to clouds like Bluemix, we don't have to worry about first moving everything across. Everything is stored separately. What this also does is gives you the opportunity to extend your data source capabilities by maybe looking at relational database or other NoSQL data stores instead of a NSF. So already just separating these two provides a lot of value add. Now, Coming to our design, the first thing that we want to do is we just want to go and create an X page, and we're going to call it home. This will be the only X page that we create in this demo, and I'm going to close this for now, and we're going to move on to custom controls. So the first custom control that I create is what I'm going to regard as my core layout. So I usually prefix all my custom controls with CC, and what I also do is I prefix it with a number, and usually my core controls that are not application specific but more specific to the portal are prefixed with 0. The reason why I do this is it just makes it easy to filter your custom controls and to also sort the custom controls and group everything together. So I've just found over the years that prefixing it with a number and grouping these things together just makes stuff so easy to find at the end of the day. So I'm going to call this call layout, and I'm going to click on OK. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the extension library list of controls, and I'm going to drag the application layout control onto this custom. And I'm going to go and choose responsive bootstrap configuration, and I'm going to go and say OK. So let's go and set some quick properties. The first one is I'm just going to rename the ID of this application layout to core app layout, and we'll be using this later on. We're going to disable the banner. We're not using it in this demo. And in the title bar, we are going to use this, and I'm just going to say Optimus XPages demo. And what I'm going to do here is add 2 basic nodes. Now notice I'm not adding page nodes, I'm adding 2 basic nodes. And the reason for that is because we only have 1 page. We have to treat these menu items a little differently. So the first one I'm going to call leave requests. And I'm going to go add another basic node, and I'm going to call that one tasks. And what I'm going to do for now is, because we are not using the page node, it's not going to show that it's selected. So I'm just for now going to default the selected to true. And you'll see what it does shortly. If we move on along the properties, I'm going to disable placebar, disable footer, and legal, because we're not going to use them right now. So now that I've created my core layout, the next thing that I want to do is just go and add it to my home X page. And it's as easy as just dragging it onto the control. Save, close, and we're done with that for now. So before we go and preview this, what we need to do is just go and set up a theme, because we otherwise the application layout doesn't know what theme we're using. It's only just going to render the output as standard. And the reason for that is if you go into the XSP properties, you'll see that the application theme as a default is platform default, which doesn't really give you much. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and under resources, we're going to go and create a theme. And I'm going to call it default. And I have a little snippet over here that just allows us to speed up this process a little bit. So I'm going to overwrite everything with the snippet, and I'll explain shortly what it does. So if we go on top, you'll see that I extend Bootstrap 3. That allows me to use the latest version of Bootstrap in the XPages extension library, which is 3.3.6 if I'm not mistaken. Then I've got 2 metadata properties that I provide. The one import, which is very default when it comes to Bootstrap design, and the other one is just that the latest version of IE is applied if you are opening this up in Internet Explorer. Underneath that, I also just override the XPages root page title to be whatever the title is of the database. It's just standard practice. All right. So now that I've saved this theme, I can close it and go now and change the platform to default, which is our theme. All right. While we're inside the properties, just 1 or 2 settings that I've enabled / disabled as a practice when it comes to XPages Dev. I'll always go and set the minimum release for 908.5. That's actually meant to be 901. If I go to the persistence tab, you'll see in this case I have keep only the current page in memory. Defaulted to that unless we do require more than 1 page to be in memory, of which we would go and change it. I have in default, I always enable this anyways. You'll see that the client validation is off, The encoding is UTF-8 and the doc type is HTML5. These are great settings to add to your web pages when you're building modern HTML5 applications as well as Bootstrap applications. Very important, this setting over here is usually disabled as a default, and I switch it on because what happens is, even though these settings are provided, if this is off, it doesn't write these meta tags to the HTML page. And what happens is your Bootstrap cannot properly align the responsive design to the form factor of the screen, which gives a little bit of a horizontal scroll to the user. But by switching this on, it eliminates that problem and you're good to go. Second, lastly, over here, I've enabled the normal XPages extension library and the OpenNTF Domino API. These are the only two that I enable for most of the development unless we start doing some API-driven code. Then, finally, if we go into the source, I have over here a property for the OpenNTF Domino API, which provides these values. I'm not too sure what these values do. All I know is that Mr. Paul Withers recommended these as a default unless I want to go and do something specific, so I will trust him and just leave it at that. Okay, so we're done with the XSP properties. And if I'm not mistaken, we can already go and demo a first version of our application. So I'm going to paste this URL because the only difference is the folder that it's in. So now we're referencing our new design. And if I hit that, all right, so there we go. Our application layout control is enabled, and we've got our title and our two items. And you'll see, yeah, leave request is selected, as I manually said it should be inside the application layout control. And offhand, you already know everything is Bootstrap and responsive, and if I do this, you can see that it most definitely is using Bootstrap. So what we on the content where a little bit of the complexity comes in. What we need to do here is we need to use a very special control called the dynamic content control. This is very powerful because what it does is it allows us to inject the components as well as the HTML that we require to another application. The dynamic content control will strip the components as well as the HTML so that we keep the page optimized, and it will inject the brand new components and the new HTML that are related to tasks. All right, so we're going to go and design that now quickly.
John, this is Paul.
Yeah.
We seem to be having some audio glitches where your voice is being interrupted for 2-3 second intervals at a time. I don't know if there's anything on your end.
Sorry to interrupt John and Paul. The reasoning for that usually is GoToWebinar just has some bandwidth issues whenever there's a whole lot going on in a live, fast-paced demo. So it just takes a second to catch up. Whenever you're switching back and forth in applications, it just eats up the bandwidth. So that's all that's going on.
Okay, so maybe you got to move your mouse slower.
All right.
We'll
Best
let you
news in
know.
the world is all right. Has it been bad over the past couple of minutes, or have you received most of the information and I can continue?
We've received the most of it, and you can continue. We can kind of piece together. I would suggest that you continue, and I will interrupt you if it starts getting really bad.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. And apologies to everyone. All right, so slowing down. Sorry, I had to do that. Okay, so we are going to go and create a custom control, and we are going to call it CC core body. So this will look after the body content of our single page app. If I click on OK, what I'm going to do over here is add a extension library control called the dynamic content. I'm going to name this ID to dynamic core body. Now inside this dynamic content control, what we want to do is we want to go and add two facets for now. And we do that by saying xp colon this dot facets. And inside there, I'm going to go, for the meantime, just go and add an xp div for now, which we will replace later. And we'll give it the facet key of leaf. And we'll create another xp div with a key of tasks. All right, I'll go back to the dynamic content and we'll say just for now, load the leave facet and save. Now, we're using just divs for now, and in that I'll actually just say I am in leave, I am in tasks. These keys are very important. We're going to be using them throughout our logic, and these are the IDs that will allow the application to understand, am I in the leave section, am I in the task section, so that it can make the necessary decisions. So it's very important that you keep a note of these two items over here. So once I've added this, I can then just connect the core body to the core layout control. And I'm going to go and quickly preview this to ensure that it does in fact load. Okay, so this is a great start. It tells us that our dynamic content is loading. It is default to the div that I created for leave. And now what we can do is move on to the next phase, which is applying some of the back-end logic. And this is now where we really start using the model view controller strategy, because we are going to go and create a model called app model, and that is going to allow us to set some default properties based on the application that is running in our design. Then we also have an app controller which will handle the logic around the application that is loading, and it will give us the dynamicness and capability that we need to treat this portal like a single page app. So in the design, I'm going to go to where am I? Code, and I'm going to go to Java, and I'm going to go and create a new class. I'm going to package it as core, and I'm going to give it a name of app model. I'm also just going to grab a snippet which will speed up the process. Sorry, I'm pausing like this so that I don't talk while the screens are transitioning, so I hope it really is working, because I feel like never mind. So in this app model, we have two properties called a data path and an app name. These are the two properties that we are going to use whenever we load a specific application inside our single page app. The data path is a way of telling the application which data store do you need to connect to now that you're loading leave. And the app name is the ID that we used earlier on that defines the application that we're running, for example, leave or tasks. Now, as a default, in the constructor, I set these values as blank because we're going to manage them inside the application controller. And at the bottom here, we just have default getters and setters that are generated so that we combine these to UI components if we need them. Next up, I'm going to go and create a controller for our application. Under the package core, I'm going to call it app controller. Again, I have a snippet for this that I'm going to quickly copy and paste. I hope everyone is where I am, where we've seen the code. So the app controller just does a few cool things for us. Firstly, it has a property which is the app model, and this allows the app controller to manage how the model works in our single page app. We also have a string property called default app, which is defaulted to leave, so that we don't have to set the default value inside the custom control itself, but rather manage it via our core logic. And for now, we're just doing this as leave. You can obviously work ways around this to go and fetch this from configuration profiles, giving you the capability of dynamically choosing which app loads first when you open up your page. This init app is our core function. What it does is whenever the init app runs, it goes and resets the memory objects, and it goes and says, okay, now you want me to load leave, or now you want me to load tasks. And based on what you decide, it will go and instantiate a new instance of the app model, set the key, to the property so that we can use it, and it also goes and sets the path of the application you're using in the event you need to reflect different data stores. And you'll see that I'm using the condition if key equals leave, if key equals tasks. Once again, these are the IDs of our apps that we refer to throughout our design. If we move down, we also have a function called switch app. And this is the function that will run when users click on the menu items on top. And what that does is it initiates the above function so that the memory objects are instantiated accordingly. But more importantly, it tells the dynamic content control to show the new facet based on the ID selected. And the code underneath just looks after finding the dynamic content control and manipulating it accordingly. This code is the equivalent of the server-side JavaScript get component ID .show. The reason why I'm not using something so simple is because I try my best to keep all the code together. It would hurt me to now have to go and write one server-side line of code just so that I can manage the dynamic content control. I'll rather just take the pain and have everything run centrally over here in my Java code base. And then finally at the bottom, I've just got some getters for the app model and the default app. Okay, is everything okay? I hear voices. I assume yes. Okay,
yes,
so
everything
now that
fine, John. And the audio,
okay.
just so you know, the audio's been working fine the last couple minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Howard. Okay, so now that we have our application controller, what we need to do is we need to expose this application controller as a managed bean to our XPages UI. So what we need to do is go to the Package Explorer, and in the web content, web INF, in the faces config, we need to just go and add a managed bean for our application controller. And if you see this, you'll see that I have a managed bean called app. It connects to my core.application controller, and it has a scope of view. Because we never use any other XPages and we always stay on the one XPage, we don't need to change the scope or make it session or application. We can just keep it as view. So if I save this, we can now go to our core layout. And in our core layout, what we want to do is when the application loads for the first time, we want to make sure that the application controller is in fact instantiated. And what I do over there is under the custom controls event of before page load, I just have a script that says app, which is our application controller, dot init app, and I pass it a value of null. I pass it a value of null because inside the application controller logic, we go and define what is the default app. Whereas if I had to put here leave or tasks, we are manually overriding it. What I can also do in our application layout control, in the title bar items, is I can now go and change this manual selection of true. I can change it to a JavaScript expression where it's only true or false based on app.appModel, which is a property of our application controller, .appName is the same as leave. And that will return a true or false value. And I can copy this, go to my tasks node, and do the same thing. Instead, I use tasks. That's our unique ID. So that will also again return true or false. If I save this, then all will be well with this part. And if we do go and demo, we should still see leave requests as a selected value. All right, So that tells us that it is in fact working, because we used to have it manually selected to true, but now it's fetching it from our app model, which is inherited through the application controller. All right, so far so good. Now we've got an app controller that's giving us what we need. What we can do now is we can now start working on finalizing the transition between leave and tasks, and from there we can now start building the actual forms and views that make up our applications. If I go back into the core layout, for these two items, which is leave requests and tasks, they've got a property called submit value. Now the way the application layout control works is it's got one event listener, which is called on item click, that manages the entire application layout control. And how it works is it uses the submit value every time a person clicks on a certain item, in our case the two menu items, but it could also be a number of other items that could be added to the core to the application layout. And this allows us to centrally manage what the user clicked in the application layout control and how to respond to that click. So if we just go again to the title properties and we go to leave requests, we want to say that whenever a user clicks on leave, submit a value of the ID leave. And whenever someone chooses tasks, submit a value with the ID tasks. We can then go to the event listener of our application layout control, and we can go and say here app.init app, app.switch app, and we pass the submit value. Now how do we get the submit value? Well, it's available via context. As easy as that. We called this application layout core app layout, and I want to be sure that we don't do a full page refresh. So when this event listener is triggered, we're going to switch this full to partial update, and we're going to select or provide core app layout. And we're also going to enable partial execution, because we don't need to update any of the surrounding components. We only want to update the core app layout and anything that exists within. And that's what partial execution does for us, which is very, very powerful. Before we do another test, let's just go to the core body, which is our dynamic content control. And you can see earlier on we added a default facet of leave. We can change this now, and we can change it to an expression that says app.appModel.appName. So now we dynamically define what is the default facet for the dynamic content control to load. If we go back to our demo, we now see that if I click on tasks, tasks is now a selected value, which is exactly what we're looking for, and the dynamic content has changed from I am in leave to I am in tasks. If I change it back, there we go. So we're already well on our way to creating a single page app and having it as optimized as possible. What we can do now is start working on the actual leave controller and the leave model to go and create the necessary view and form. So I'm back in Java. Now, what we do as a great practice here at Ukuvuma is for every one of our form models, like leave or task, we go and create a Java class that we call form header model. And this Java class will have properties that help us understand what to do with that form in case they're opening it up as a document or creating it as a new document. Examples of this of, is it a new doc? Should it be opened as read-only? Instead of manually determining this inside the actual XPages controls, we dynamically determine this when the actual model is loaded into memory. So what we're going to do over here is create a new Java class under core, and we're going to call it form header model. To save a bit of time, I'm just going to go and copy a snippet quickly. I hope everyone is with me. So you'll see that there are 4 properties that make up this form header model. The ID, which will be the universal ID of the document, the form name, which is the alias name of the form, and 2 Boolean values of is it new and is it read only. In the constructor, I always assume as a default that you are creating a new document unless you change these properties otherwise. Okay, and that's why I set the ID and form name to blank. Is it new doc is true and read only is false. I then have getters and setters so that we can just go and we combine them to UI components if we need to. So now that the form header model is complete, we can go and create our leave model, which will make up the leave request that we want to submit. We'll package this under leave, and we'll call it leave model. Again, I have a snippet just to save a little bit of time. And from our demo, I don't know if you remember, but we only had 3 fields. We had the leave type, which was a combo box, a leave from, and a leave to, which were date values. What we have over here is a 4th property called header, and you'll see it's connecting to our form header model. And this is where we can provide sort of the header details related to our document. When we instantiate it, we just default all the values, and we have getters and setters so that we combine them accordingly. So I can save and close this, and that makes up our model. I will then go and create a leave controller. Under the package leave, I just call it leave controller. And again, I've got a snippet over here to help us out. And this is the last snippet I'll be copying. And this is probably the most complicated part of this demo, because the leave controller has to manage a couple of things related to the actual leave model. Firstly, the leave model, the leave view, and the leave form that we are going to interact with are going to be managed not in a dynamic content control, but in a switch control within the dynamic content. The switch control is different to the dynamic content, where it still strips the HTML and injects HTML as and when you need it, but it maintains the components of all the facets in the memory in the component tree so that it can do things like maintain state. A good example of this is, let's say that you were in a view, you went to page 2 of that view, you opened up a document and you closed the document. You'd like to be in page 2 of that view when you close the document, and that is what a switch control allows you. Whereas a dynamic content control gives you the opposite, where it strips the components from the component tree, so if you had to open up a document and close it, you are reset back to page 1 of the view. So those are the 2 primary differences between a switch and a dynamic content control. You'll see over here that I am referencing the leave model, and I'm giving it a variable name of leave, and I've also got the facet, which will either have a value of view or a value of form, and we'll manage this facet accordingly depending on when you want to load the view versus load the form. I've then got a couple of functions over here. The one is to document. What happens when you create a new leave request? You'll see that I instantiate a new instance of the leave model, and I provide the form alias name of that leave, and I set the facet to form, which will tell the switch control, please load the form and populate accordingly. I then have a closed document, which will nullify our leave model because we don't need it anymore, freeing it up from memory, and I will change the facet back to view. We've then got save document, and this is where there's a little bit more code, because now we have to interact with our data store. And you can see over here that I use the app controller, app model, data path to tell me retrieve this data store, please. If the database is opened, I then use the leave model's header property object to see if it is a new doc. If it is, it will go and create a document and write the form alias name. Else, it will go and use the leave header ID, which is a universal ID, and it goes and gets the document. Either way, the document needs to exist. So once I have the doc, I will then go and write the values to the docs, to the fields. I save the document, nullify the leave model because we don't need it anymore. We're going back to the view and changing the facet. The final function inside this controller is open document. Again, we need to get a handle on the data store, and once it's open, we already know what the ID is because it's passed as a parameter to this function. So then we just say data store.getDocument by universal ID. If it exists, we instantiate a new leave model, provide the headers. So now you can see here, I say that the is new doc is now false. It's no longer a new document. And the leave type is equal to the field values, and I populate the leave from and the leave to. Finally, I set the facet to form. Other than that, I've just got 2 getters, which will allow us to interact via other objects. And this is it. This is what makes up all the logic surrounding our current leave model, our leave request. So we are not going to add this leave controller as a managed bean to so that it can be accessed via the UI. The fact that we have our app controller, we don't need to do that. What we would rather do is in the app controller, we go and create a new property called public leave controller, and we'll call it leave con. Let's go and create a getter for that. Apologies. And we'll have to just import it. Thank you. There you go. And if I work my way down these functions, you'll see under init app, if the key is equal to leave, not only do we have to set the data path, but we also want to instantiate our leave controller so that it's not null. All right, so now that we've done that, if we go further down the list, you'll see that we have reset controllers. What we want to do is we want to nullify any form controllers that we know that need to be reset when we switch in between applications. Because as a default, we assume that if you're moving from one application to the other, you do not need the previous application in memory. In your case, it might be different, it might not. But it is just a default that we apply in our logic, and then we would manipulate it accordingly as time goes by. So leave con is equal to null. I can now save my application controller, and we can go and start working on the UI. So before I get to the actual XPages design, I just want to go to the portal data, and I want to go and create a view for our leave requests. I'm just going to call this leave requests. We know that the form alias name is form is equal to leave request. And I want to create 3 columns for 3 of the fields that we're going to populate, which is leave type, leave from, leave to. This gets picked up by the dynamic view panel that we're going to create very soon. We'll say that the leave from is sorted descending so that it makes the newest first. And we're also going to change it because I know already that it's going to display the date and time, and I only want it to display the date. Finally, we'll create one more column, leave to. We won't sort it because we want to keep everything as optimized as possible. And there we have our leave request view. So now we can go and we can go back to our XPages design, and we can go and create some controls. So before we create the leave control or the form control, what we first want to do is create the switch, the wrapper, that will wrap together anything related to the leave application. So I'm going to create a new custom control, and I'm going to call it CC2 leave wrapper. Oh, it's CC1, my apologies. We haven't done a 2. We haven't done a 1 yet. Inside this custom control, I'm going to go and add the switch control from the XPages extension library. I'm going to just give it an ID of switch leave wrapper. And inside here, the selected facet of this switch will be an expression that connects to our app controller dot leave controller, which exists within our app controller, dot facet, which is a property of our leave controller, allowing us to control are we loading the view or the form. Now, from experience, we need to partially refresh the switch content, but you cannot pass the switch ID to partially refresh because when the switch is rendered, it doesn't actually provide those IDs or details. So I learned this the hard way, and what I need to do is I need to wrap the switch control so that we can refresh the content, and I do that by just providing an XP div with an ID of div leave wrapper. That's the only reason why I'm adding the div, is because we cannot get a handle on the switch when we do a partial refresh. All right. Now that we've got this in place, we can go and create our leave view. So I'm going to create a new control, CC1, leave view. And inside here, I'm going to go and add a dynamic view panel. There you are, from the XPages extension library. I'm going to say the database is other because we're going to populate this shortly. I'm just going to say whatever for now. And I'm going to call the view leave requests. That's what we called it earlier on. And I'm just going to give the data source name view leave. So here is where I'm just going to set up a couple of additional properties. First and foremost, let's just change the ID of the dynamic view to say dynamic view leave. And if we go to the all properties, we can just enable partial execute, partial refresh, and the refresh ID is dynamic view leave, which is our dynamic control. Underneath over here, under data, we want to keep everything optimized. So our data cache needs to be ID only. I don't want to send through full values. I'm only going to send through the ID. And at the bottom, I'm going to say that our, our variable for our dynamic view rows is just going to be called leave row. All right, so these are just some basic properties that make up the dynamic view panel. And finally, wherever we put that whatever, where's whatever? Here it is. We're going to replace with an expression that says app.appModel.dataPath, which already has the path of the data store that we want to connect to. All right. So there's two other things that I want to do over here. Is I want to create a button that says create new leave request. So we'll say button leave create, and we'll call the label new leave request. I pray no one's sleeping right now. And what we're going to do behind the event code over here is we're going to add a script that says app, our application controller, .leaveCon, which is our leave controller, .create document. It's already a function that I explained earlier on, and this is all we need in order to compose a new document. We want to partially refresh, and remember earlier on we said we want to refresh the switch, not the dynamic content, just the switch. And we couldn't get a handle on the switch, so we needed a div. So I'm going to call it div leave wrapper. Copy that, because we're also going to partially execute. We don't need to refresh the surrounding components or update them. So that's all we need to create a new document. What we also need now is whenever a user clicks on an item in the dynamic view panel, there's an event handler called onColumnClick. And what this will allow us to do is get a handle on the entry that was clicked and run the necessary server-side script. So over here, app.leaveController.openDocument. And this is the only time we need to pass a property, and the property we need to pass is the universal ID. But because we created a variable for our dynamic view row called leave row, we can now do a get universal ID. There we go. Again, partial refresh. We only want to refresh the switch. Excelente. So now our leave view is pretty much complete, unless I've missed something. So I'm going to close that for now, and I'm going to go and add it to my leave wrapper, which is the switch control. And you see it already provides an XP key. And what did we say? The key is either view or form. And in this case, we need to give it the key of view. So before we test anything, we first have to go and create our form. So if I go back to custom controls, I'm going to create a new custom control, and I'm going to call it CC1 leave form. Inside here, I'm going to drag a form table. I really do enjoy the form table. It works quite nice when it comes to responsiveness, and it gives me a lot of flexibility. I use it most of the time. So I'll drag that on over there. I don't need the ID of the form table, and if you've seen posts from me in the past, you'll notice that I don't apply IDs if I don't need them. The form title, I'm going to say just for now, leave request. And I'm just going to go and add one, disable the error summary so that we only see the validations on the detail. All right. So now that we have that, we can go and add a form layout row. And again, for our form layout row, we're going to remove the ID. We're going to give it a label of leave type. And I don't think we need to do anything else here. We can just go and add a combo box. Now for this demo, I'm using stuff like combo boxes and normal datetime pickers. In the real world, I'd use select two controls from Twitter Bootstrap, or I'd use the datetime pickers from Bootstrap, third-party plugins. It just really makes it a lot better. But for this demo, it's easy enough just to get you up and running. So for this combo box, what I need to do here is I need to bind this to my leave model. And I do that by saying app.leaveController.leaveModel, which we called leave.leaveType, which is the property of the leave model. And that's enough for me to bind this value to my Java class, my model. What I also want to do is just provide some values. And we'll start with select. Let's give it a 1 for now. We'll add another one called annual leave. And another one called sick leave. Finally, we go and just set the required to true. And we say the validators is validate required and leave type required. Okay, there's just one thing I quickly want to do here. You'll notice when I provided the value of select, I gave it a value of 1. The reason for that is so that I can just remove that 1 and provide it with a blank value. This will mean that the select control, the combo box, will never see select as an actual value, but rather as a blank value. The rest of them can be kept as it is. Next up, I just want to add another form row. Where are you? There we are. And again, we don't need the ID. And inside the form row, we're going to add a edit box. Thank you. And for the edit box, we don't need an ID. So if we just go quickly to the UI for this, the label over here is leave from. And if we click on the edit box, we can go to data, change this to a date time, enable the picker, bind the field control to our model. So it's app.leavecon.leave.leavefrom. Casing is very sensitive. Leave from. And then we can just go and say that it is required and leave from required. Okay, that's enough in an example for now. I'm just going to do one more copy paste here because we want for leave 2 as well. And that's it. In the footer, I'm going to go and add just quickly a panel. And inside there, I'm going to go and add a button. And I'm going to call the button, yeah, we do need to give it an ID because now we're going to bind an event listener to this. So it's btn leave save. I'm just going to call it save. And in the events, I'm going to run a script that's called app.leaveController.save document. We don't need to provide anything because we have the document in memory in our model inside the leave controller. We want to run a partial update, div leave wrapper. We only want to refresh the switch, and we also can enable partial execution, div leave wrapper. I'm then going to go and create a link. And I'm going to call it link leave cancel with a text of cancel and do something similar over here where on click we can add a script that says app.leaveController. Close document. Oh, it's a lot of code before testing. I enable partial update, div leave wrapper, and execution mode, div leave wrapper. If I save and close this, and if the coding gods are on my side, all we need to do now is add the leave form to our leave wrapper. Here we are. and give it an XP key of form. And our background controller logic will do the rest. So I believe I've already added this to the core body. Oh no, I haven't. My apologies. Okay, so where we added these divs in the beginning, what we need to do now is replace these divs with the relevant wrappers. In this case, we only have the leave wrapper, so I'm going to drag that inside there. And I'm going to give it an XP key of leave, and I'm going to remove the div that we used for leave. All right, so it's testing time. If I go back to the portal and refresh, please don't fail. Okay, good start. So now we can click on new leave request and it all falls down. My apologies for that. If I just quickly go here to the leave view. It's a pity that didn't work the first time. My apologies, everyone. If you can allow me just a quick second to see what it did. And I think I know. app.leavecon.facet. That's right, the selected facet, which is a key of view and form. And we do have the div leave wrapper. I did add that correctly. I can't believe this. I tested this so many times, and now this is what happens. The div leave view. Oh my goodness. Okay. There we go. My apologies, everyone. I went and added the leave view twice instead of adding the leave form. Lovely. We are back on track. There we go. Div leave form. Suppose it could have been worse. So if we go back to our demo, may that be the only surprise. We can close Firebug for now. New leave request. There we go. If we click on save, we can see that the validation is happening. We can change these values over here, and we can click on save. There's our annual leave. We can go and create another one, which I called untitled for some silly reason. I'm on a roll today. And we can save those. And we can also open these requests. There we go. And we have cancel. So our basic CRUD operations are working 100%. And we now have a working version of leave. So at this time, we ask ourselves, okay, but what does it take now in order to go and do the same thing for tasks? So now we spend most of the time just designing this for leave requests. Well, the good news is with the way we designed the backend with all the necessary controllers and logics, if you haven't figured it out by now, it will actually take but a few minutes to go and create the very same for tasks. And because we do have a few minutes left, I'm going to jump onto this venture. So please bear with me and try to stay awake. I'm going to go quickly create the necessary logic within the next 5 minutes to go and create the same instance for tasks. And what we do know about tasks is that it's only got 2 fields, which is the task name and the due date. So with that knowledge, I'm going to go back to the design. And I'm essentially going to start from the bottom up because most of this is copy, paste, find, and replace. So in the data, I'm going to create a copy of our leave request view. I'm going to rename it to tasks. Inside the view, I'm going to change the form name. I'm going to remove one of the columns. It's no longer required. I'm going to rename this to due date. And we'll remove the sorting.
Hey, John, this is Howard. Was the form name form? In your selection for the view, you typed in form. Is that right?
Thank you, Howard.
Sure.
Thank you,
I didn't
Howard.
think you would call it form.
I'm on a, this is what happens when you present twice off to each other. Thanks very much, Howard. All right, so we've got due date over there, and leave type, we're going to rename to task name. And we'll just sort this ascending and change that to task name, and we have our view in place. So that's out of the way. We can now move on to the next step, which is under Java, to go and create the necessary controllers and models for our tasks. And again, this is copy and paste, and we'll start with the leave model, and we're going to change the package to task, and you'll see that it has a red highlight, and it's going to ask me to move leave to task. Very important, when you do stuff like this with Java, please refresh the design so that it takes effect in the background. Otherwise, you'll find your Domino designer is frozen. Leave model, we're going to change to task model. And again, we have to rename. That's fine. Again, it has to refresh in the background. And now we can go ahead and change these properties. So instead of leave type, we have task name. We don't need the third property. And this is due date. Task model, task name, due date. And I think this is really the beauty of the way designing these applications the way I have as an example. It might not appeal to everyone, but notice how easy it is to copy and paste and duplicate your logic to quickly go and create different forms and CRUD operations. So all I need to do here is just create the getters and setters for due date and task name. Save, and that is my task model complete. I can now go into this copy of leave controller, package it as task. It will ask me to move. Thank you. There you go. Refresh. Very important. Task controller. Okay, and again, we need to rename the background. Thank you. Refresh. All right. And now, instead of leave model, we have task model, and our variable name will be task, not leave. This stays the same. In create document, task is equal to new task model. Task.header.form name is equal to task, not form. Thanks again, Howard. Under close document, task is equal to null. So do you see what I mean, how we're just updating these variable names and the rest of the logic sits intact? Task.header.isNewDoc, task.header.form name, task.header.id, and then over here we want to just change this so that it's task name and due date as our field names, and this will be task name and task.due date. Task is equal to null, and I trust everything that's happening over here because it already worked in leave. If I go to open document, task is equal to new task model, task.header.id, task.header.isNewDoc, leave type. Okay, so yeah, again, it's not leave type, it's task name, and the field name is task name. Leave from is task.due date, and due date is our field name. We remove this third value because we don't need it, and we finalize facet is form, and at the bottom over here, task model, it's just changing our header, return task. Our controller is done, except that it wants to import the task model. That should be good enough. Okay, on our, it's usually a good idea after you copy and paste Javas that you do a perform and clean and build, and then most of your errors just disappear. So now that we've done the controller and model out the way, we just need to apply the task controller to our app controller because we do not service it as a managed bean. So over here we say public task controller task con. We create a getter for this. We import it. Oh, okay, thank you for that. I accidentally misspelled. And then we just work down the ranks. So we can see over here, if key equals task, like we did with leave, all we do is we say task is equal to new task controller. And if we move, I'm sure I added, oh, sorry, task con is equal to new task controller. And here by reset controllers, task con is equal to null. So we are now done with our application controller. Or aren't we? I think again it's just worrying we have to do a refresh. Alright, so final changes that we need to make is under custom controls we need to go and create a copy of these three, because we are going to create a duplicate of each one that reflects task. And we'll start with the form CC2 task form. Stay with me everyone, we're almost done. Leave view, we change to CC2 task view. I've got a special surprise at the end of this if you are still awake. And CC2 task wrapper. Alright, if we go into the task form, I literally just go to the source and replace leave with task. And just the labels where relevant as well. So yeah, button task save, div task wrapper, we're almost done. Okay, yeah, by the form rows, what we need to do is leave type will change to task name. That's the label of our row. And we're going to remove the combo box and replace it with a edit box because the task name is just an edit control. We remove the ID because we don't need it. And we just bind this to our model app.taskcon.task.task name. And let's just go say it is required and task name required. Okay, so that takes care of that one. Over here by leave from, we can just actually relabel this to due date and change this to taskcon.task.due date. Everything else other than this, due date required. And we can remove this form row because we're not going to be using it. We only have the two values. Okay, so that takes care of our task form. If we go to the task view, again, we just go to the source and we replace leave with task in most places. A bit monotonous, but the fact that you can do this in a few minutes makes it all worthwhile. Alright, so I am running out of time, but we are very much near the end. Alright, and we're at the bottom. Div task wrapper, app.taskcon.openDocument task row.get universal ID. Our task view is complete. Finally, in our task wrapper, we just go and rename this to task wrapper. We rename the switch, and this must point to the task controller.facet, and we can now replace these two controls and add the task view. There we go, with the facet name of view, like we did in our leave, and task form with a facet name of form, like we did in our leave. And we are one step away. In the core body, we need to go and replace this div of tasks with the task wrapper. And we'll just call it tasks. So again, it's a lot of code that I've written, but if all goes my way, we can easily just go back to this demo. Just give it 1 or 2 seconds to reflect. Come on, sorry. This is the joys of working. That's just perfect. That's just perfect. My apologies, everyone. But what we'll need to do is, there's one silly thing that's probably happening over here. Oh, project clean. Remember, we changed the Java controls, and we have one error. I believe that's it. If we just try that one more time. Okay. Now if we go to tasks, we have our view, new task. There's our task form. Validation is working. Test task 1. Provide a due date of 11. Save. There it is. We can open it up. We can change the value. Save. We have a CRUD operation for our task. So we literally went and duplicated an application or a CRUD application within a few minutes to now go and create more than one instance within our single page app. Now I'm at the point where I am going to be closing off, and I believe I have 5 minutes that I can daringly use so that I can still give people 10 minutes of Q&A. And what I want to do here quickly is I just want to show you and remind everyone that we are in fact using Twitter Bootstrap. It is built into every one of the controls. So if I do go to our leave view as an example, I can go to the dynamic view panel, go to the properties, and at the bottom I can say, for example, width is 100%, and the data table class, I can start throwing in Bootstrap classes. For example, table, table hover, table striped. Okay, I can go to the leave request button, and as a style class, I can provide btn /info, because these are default classes for Bootstrap once again. So if I go and save these, just by making those 2 small changes, I can go back to this design, refresh it, and now our view looks much better. It's got hover capabilities, it's got striped alternate rows, and our button even looks much better. So we have to remember that with a little bit of Bootstrap from here, even though the UI is plain, you can now go and extend this UI and apply all the great Bootstrap controls that you want to. And now would be a great time to actually show you one of the projects that we're actually busy on. It is a survey system, and you can see inside here that while the UI is a lot more advanced and it's providing third-party controls like Kendo grids or some heavyweight client-side capabilities like having multiple forms and pages and views and rows opened at the same time, model dialogues that are created. The back end of this design is not so far removed from what I've just demonstrated through the session. And this is really how you can take your XPages dev using single page designs to a completely different level, because everything is just built in. And these practices that I've shown you here can really build a great boilerplate and a great foundation for you to move forward and really build some crazy XPages applications. All right. So on closing, the great news is all of this can be found on GitHub at github.com/John Jardin Optimus XPages. And as a little bit of an Easter egg, inside that source code on GitHub, I've also included an example of running scheduled X agents, which access your Java XPages codebase. And I run a multi-threaded operation whenever you switch the menu items on top to show you how you can process operations without affecting or blocking the user interface that it runs in its own thread. So be sure to go and download that and go and have a lot of fun with everything that I've done and shown you today. For more information, obviously IBM XPages, you've got xpages.info, you've got the XPages knowledge base, and there were already 3 XPages webinars. Mine was Optimus XPages Part 1, and you also had the Getting Started with the OpenNTF Domino API and responsive applications using XPages. The reason why I included these is because they really make sense when it comes to this presentation that you've watched. And then you've got Mr. Johnny Oldenburger's session at the end that's expanding XPages with Bootstrap plugins coming in June, and we're all looking very, very forward to that. All right, so here are my contact details, and this concludes my session for today. I will hand it over, and I really trust that everyone enjoyed it, and thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy.
John, thank you so much. That was great. That was definitely a fast-paced dive into your application, but very well done. And several people in the questions said, "Great job." So we have a couple of questions lined up. Before we get to your question, just a reminder, you can still ask your questions in the questions pane on GoToWebinar in the interface there. And I'll just put up the last slide that had some upcoming events throughout the June, August timeframe, as well as in case people want to make advanced plans. Connect 2017 has been moved. It's no longer anywhere close to Disney World. It's in San Francisco, and it's been moved to February. In addition, there's two great regional events, MWLUG in Austin, Texas, which will be even better than last year, and ICON UK, which I'm sure will also be better than last year, taking place in London. So if you're in those geographies, definitely try to attend those. Just a point of note, I know that you, the folks who are looking at TLCC products, we have a really not very well-named course called Rapid XPages Development Course, which spends a lot of time going into the application layout control. So it's something that kind of is a mystery to you. That one course I just wanted to point out is probably not by the title you would figure that out, but we do spend a lot of time on the application layout control. So Paul, do you have some questions for John?
Yes, and just want to reinforce a couple of comments on awesome job, John. Really great demonstration and explanation. So I have a question from Jen. In your combo box, if you have many values, where should those values be stored? And a comment on wanting to, reduce the server-side JavaScript involved. So what are your comments on that?
Great. That's actually a good question because I manually added those entries for the sake of this demonstration. So what I would do in the real world is in the leaf controller where I had the leaf types, or where in the leaf model, in the leaf controller, I actually create a function called retrieve leaf types as an example, and I don't have it as a void function inside Java, but rather as an array list object. And the array list object plays very nice not only with combo boxes and list boxes controls inside XPages, but it plays extremely nice when it comes to saving these multiple values to a notes document, because what happens is when you retrieve these values from a notes document, it usually gets retrieved as a vector object, which you can easily convert into an array list. So the leaf controller would handle the logic of fetching the leaf types, building an array list of object values, and then inside the actual combo box control, thereby values, you would have a computed expression, which would be, in this example, it would be app.leafcon.fetchLeafTypes. It's as easy as that.
And let me add on to what John said, and that is when you're dealing with combo box values, that if you go back to my XPages performance webinar, those get executed multiple times in the refresh cycle. So you definitely want to try to, if possible, if it's data that's not changing, in your Java object to store those in memory and not go to the view every time and pull in the values real time, unless the data is changing a lot. And that might be a different case. Okay, so we have, let's see if we have another question, John. You mentioned that multiple forms on XPages, you used a third-party solution. You want to elaborate on that and talk about what you used, or was that?
Multiple forms?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't, we had a question. I ran into the problem of multiple forms on XPages. And you mentioned you solved it with a third-party solution. Did you say something about that, or was it more talking about the Bootstrap controls?
I was referring to the Bootstrap controls. If we take a look at multiple forms within one X page, what a lot of people tend to do, for very good reasons probably, is use data sources that are connected to these X pages. And in these data sources, if you don't go and set the relevant properties, for example, ignore request params or a couple of other properties like the scope, what happens is these controls just completely, these data sources just conflict with each other 100%. However, if you take a look at how I designed it, you will notice two things. Number one, I never used one form design, and number two, I never used one document data source. I manage everything via my controllers and my models, which allows me to create unlimited amounts of the same records. I could have 5 leave requests open in the very same XPage if I wanted to. I have control over that because my models and my controller will manage the instances that I require, and there are no conflicts or request param properties or anything that I need to worry about. Everything is managed inside the controller classes.
Okay, thanks, John. And let's see, we don't seem to have any more questions queued up.
I have a question for you, John. You were refreshing to avoid designer hangings, saying it was very important, but I think that went a little quick for me. You were refreshing the application in the applications view? Is that correct?
Yes, sorry about that. So, and this only really applies when you copy and paste in Java classes. So what happens is when you copy and paste, then inside the Java class you'll end up renaming the package or renaming the class name. Even though it looks as if it's renamed, in the backend it's actually not reflecting such in the backend. And what happens is if you're not careful, you'll end up freezing Domino Designer. You have to restart everything. So all I did was in the application icon in the designer, in other words, the full app, I just right-click and I say refresh. And what it does is it reflects in the actual design, it reflects the new class name and package that I changed inside the UI.
Oh, that's an excellent tip. Thanks. Going back, I think I've seen those moments where designer kind of hangs, and that does explain it. Thank you very much for that one.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, John. I try to avoid in Java classes for that same reason. So now I learned something. I learned a lot actually on your webinar. So thank you. I'm sure everyone else did too.
So again, not a lot of questions, but I'll try to squeeze in one of my own before we end today. You were very much you would remove the IDs that wouldn't be addressed later on for the various controllers, the input box when you added that. What's the savings? What's the value in removing those unaddressed IDs?
Okay, so great question, Paul. So when it comes to modern web development, especially now with XPages, what a lot of people should already be finding or soon find is that they would spend probably up to 35% of their time developing in the backend, in server side, and up to 65% or whatever developing inside the UI, making everything look pretty, making everything play nice. Now, I spend a lot of my time with Firebug open so that I can go and navigate to the relevant sections in my XPages to go and see what's happening and to go and see what the HTML output looks like. Now, the reason why I remove these IDs is because when you get complicated XPages applications where you have controls within controls within controls, these IDs get seriously long, and they just spam the HTML to such a point where you want to chuck your laptop out the screen or out the window and rather go work at a grocery store. That's really how I feel sometimes. And by removing unnecessary IDs, because we need to remember the only time an ID is required is when you want to get a handle on that control for whatever reason, like for example, get component, or you have an event listener, like an on-click event or whatever, yes, then you require an ID because Dojo needs those IDs to go and apply the necessary event listeners. And there's one or two very small exceptions, like when you want to use a computed field and change the tag name so that instead of it being computed, it's actually this or that or the next story. For the rest, you do not require IDs, and they just, like I said, they spam the HTML. So as a default, whenever I create controls, I remove IDs until I actually require them, of which I'll then insert them accordingly.
Thanks, John. That is once again an excellent tip and explanation. We do have a couple of more questions here. Howard, do you have any? Or?
Sure. Don wanted if you could repeat again the switch versus dynamic content control explanation in terms of which one builds a component tree and which one just is loaded when it's displayed.
Right, so I haven't got screen control and I maybe would have shown something quickly to him. But when it comes to his dynamic and switch, if you divide it into two parts, number one is the component tree. It is the in-memory component tree of all the controls that have its HTML equivalent on the screen. Okay? So I'm hoping that everyone understands those two. Now, when it comes to dynamic content control, when you switch facets, so let's say you loaded leave like we did. We said leave was the default one. According to the dynamic content, it loaded the components related to leave request, like the leave view, the leave wrapper. It loaded all of that, and it loaded its corresponding HTML. Now, when we switched from leave to tasks, what the dynamic content control did was it not only stripped out the HTML from the page the person's on that was related to leave and replaced it with the HTML for tasks, but it also stripped out the components in the component tree and replaced it with the tasks components. So that means that if you moved away from tasks, let's say you had a leave record open, and then you clicked on tasks and it loads tasks, and you click back on leave, you won't go back to your leave record because those components were not maintained. Their state was not maintained. So what happens is you'll end up on the view again. Now the switch control gives you that state maintenance. So for example, the switch control, while it strips the HTML for the leave and replaces it with tasks, it doesn't strip out the, what am I saying? Sorry, we switched between the leave view and the leave form. What stripped the HTML of the leave view when you opened a record, it still had the leave view's components in the component tree. So if I closed the leave form, the leave record, and I went back to the view, I would actually get the view in the state it was in. As an example, if I was maybe on page 2 or 3 of that view, from a pager point of view, I would still be on page 3 because the components were always maintained. It's only the dynamic control where the components are completely removed and added as and when needed. So those are the differences between switch and dynamic.
I guess another side effect of that, because if it's not in the component tree, you also can't use the get component, let's say get value, to access a control that was in something that got hidden with the dynamic content control, whereas with switch control you would be able to. So again, just because it's not in the component tree. So
yeah,
it kind of depends on what you want to do. Thanks, John.
Cool.
Okay, I think that's it, and we're also out of time. So we will send out an email with the slides and the link to the YouTube. And also in that email, we'll put in the link to John's GitHub page with the demo, as well as, thanks to Benoit, he pointed out a good article I put in the chat on how, in case you haven't done it, how do you import a GitHub project into Domino Designer and make it an NSF file, because on GitHub it's not a downloadable NSF unless John had put that up there as well. So you have to go through a couple extra steps to convert it into an actual NSF that you can run in Open Designer. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you, John, so much for doing this webinar. I know today's been a busy day for you, your second webinar of the day, and I'm sure it's time for a beer in South Africa. So enjoy a nice cold one or two. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and Paul and Courtney for being my co-host today. Courtney, did you have anything to add?
Nothing from me today, but thank you again, John. Everyone seems to be really excited and happy with your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.